The American Sidewinder missile was unlike any other at the time. The Soviet Union and China envied the weapon's capabilities, as it allowed a US-armed Taiwan to successfully take down MiG fighter aircraft by the end of 1958. However, their jealousy did not last long, after one of the American-made missiles failed to detonate when it met a Chinese plane. Safely lodged intact and sticking out of the fuselage, the Sidewinder would soon be delivered to the Soviets. By reverse engineering the weapon, the USSR would make it accessible to the Warsaw Pact, enraging the Americans. Not content with their initial intellectual theft, the Soviets would later launch a daring espionage mission to avoid inventing upgrades to the missile themselves. The People's Republic of China was preparing for an invasion of Taiwan, known officially as the Republic of China, in the summer of 1958. The One China principle called for the conquest and submission of Taiwan under one legitimate government, that of the People's Republic of China. In that spirit, the government ordered the People's Liberation Army Air Force to obtain absolute air superiority over several islands close to the mainland that were still under Taiwanese control, particularly in Quemoy and Matsu. Despite their best efforts, the communist country ultimately failed to absorb these areas. As the People's Republic of China began its attack in August of 1958, the United States decided to assist and re-equip multiple squadrons of the Republic of China Air Force with North American F-86 Sabres, the first American swept-wing fighters. Each time the communist nation sent its fighters and bombers, the nationalist Taiwanese responded with interceptors. The destructive air clashes that resulted became part of what is known as the Taiwan Crisis. Intense air battles raged in the sky over Fujian province from July to September of 1958. Despite being outnumbered, the Taiwanese pilots were managing multiple kills for every loss. Still, they had almost no way of attacking the MiG-17s provided by the USSR to China, since they operated beyond the maximum ceiling of the Sabres by several thousand feet. To combat the disadvantage, the Pentagon assessed its support and decided to equip several of the Sabres with the new and highly secretive infrared-guided homing air-to-air AIMB-9B Sidewinder missile. The U.S. military dispatched 5 highly experienced technicians from Fighter Squadron 323 to the Hsinchu Air Base in Taiwan. Along with its crew, they sent 40 Sidewinder missiles and 40 launching rails from the U.S. Marine Corps stock. Upon arrival, the team set to work on modifying 20 Taiwanese Sabres with the launch rails. They carried out the installations, explanations, and training under utmost secrecy. The Taiwanese were explicitly trained on deploying the modern missiles against MiGs flying at 40,000 feet or higher. Even though this classified Pentagon project had an air of improvisation in its execution, it yielded excellent results. Soon enough, 4 of the newly rearmed Sabres saw combat with considerable success. On September 24, 1958, the Republic of China's Air Force sent 48 of its F-86 Sabres to fight against 126 MiGs over Shantou. Communist China had sent a mix of MiG-15s and MiG-17s. The Sidewinder-armed Taiwanese pilots shot at the MiGs from about 3,000 yards away, which was a very long range for the time, while positioned below the Soviet planes. Without losing a single aircraft, the Taiwanese took down 9 confirmed Soviet planes and gained 2 additional probable kills. Of these, 6 of the attacks were executed employing the Sidewinder missile. The occasion marked the first time that guided air-to-air missiles were used in battle. Throughout the Taiwan crisis, the People's Liberation Army Air Force sent 691 combat planes to the war zone and flew over 3,700 sorties. The People's Republic of China reported 13 air battles with the Taiwanese. By the end of the conflict, each country counted a different list of losses and kills. According to Communist China, they had lost 5 planes and shot down 14. According to Taiwan, they had lost only 3 planes and shot down 31 or 32. Either way, the Taiwanese fired 6 Sidewinder missiles, 4 of which scored hits. One of the Chinese-provided MiG-17 struck by a Sidewinder survived the attack. Since the device failed to detonate, the aircraft was able to return to base with the weapon embedded in the fuselage. The Chinese removed and dismantled the missile. Soon after inspecting it, they sent it to the USSR for analysis and the prospect of replication. Once the American missile was in the hands of the Soviets, they sent it to Ivan Toropov's office. Toropov worked on the weapon with a governmental design team. The American missile had many valuable features and superior components to the Soviets' own weapons. They hoped to learn about and exploit the modular construction, as well as the relatively cheap and easy production. The Sidewinder featured an infrared-guided homing head and a free-running gyroscope that was considerably smaller than any used by the Soviets. The missile was superior in handling due to its responsive steering and great in-flight stabilization system. Gennady Sokolovsky, who had an opportunity to work on the development of a Soviet copycat, and was later the chief engineer for Wimpel, stated that, quote, "The Sidewinder missile was to us a university offering a course in missile construction technology, which has upgraded our engineering education and updated our approach to production of future missiles." The engineers of the USSR were impressed by how simple and effective the American weapon was. They reverse-engineered it and began producing their own version, the K-13 or R-3 missile, that first entered limited service in 1960. Known to the West as the AA-2, the weapon saw multiple upgrades and modifications. The R-3 version was distributed around the world and entered service with 20 different air forces. It became the most widely deployed Soviet air-to-air missile, and one of the most recognizable, much to the frustration of the United States. Still, by the time that it was first used in the Middle Eastern and Southeast Asian air conflict, the missile proved to be lagging behind newer American models. After the Soviets successfully reverse-engineered the American missile, they gave back to the Chinese by offering them the design and technical details of the K-13, along with the details of the MiG-21 in 1962. They began production in 1964 for their PL-2 missile. The weapon featured a canard aerodynamic configuration matched with a semi-spherical nose. The missile was thin and cylindrical. It had 2 pairs of fins for control and an additional 2 pairs of cross-trapezoid wings. The Chinese missile had a top speed of Mach 2.2 and was meant to counter fighters or medium bombers. It used passive infrared homing, so the launching aircraft could retreat right after shooting. The Soviets kept tinkering with their original copycat model. They made at least a dozen modifications to their K-13 initial version. The 1962 R-3S version became the first to be mass-produced. Eventually, the Soviets updated their missile in the exact same way that the United States did, raising suspicion. It became evident that the USSR had either spied on American developments or somehow gotten hold of the subsequent technological advancements following the MiG incident. The US questioned how exactly the Soviets had obtained the information to make the same updates that the Americans had worked on. Colonel Stig Erik Konstans Wennerström, a Swedish Air Force officer, was the first suspect of the technology theft. During the 1950s, he gave the Soviets several Swedish air defense plans and turned over documentation on the Saab Draken fighter aircraft project. He worked as an attaché in Washington, giving the Soviets access inside NATO, Sweden, and the United States. The Swedish Security Service had flagged him since the 1940s as a probable spy for Germany, but they could not prove their suspicions in a court of law. Since Sweden acquired the US missiles Sidewinder, Falcon, and Hawk in 1959, and Wennerström had access to air bases, he became a natural suspect. The counterintelligence operation that finally caught him red-handed in illicit activities involved a household maid secretly recruited by the Swedish Security Service. She found several rolls of film in the attic that Sweden would later collect. On June 30th, 1963, he was arrested while heading to work at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. His trial began almost immediately at the Security Services facility in Kungsholmen. It took a few days, and several attempts to develop the film rolls found in his attic. But once they were revealed, Wennerstrom was confronted about them. He'd collected thousands of photographs of highly classified and sensitive material. The Swedish authorities estimated that he had provided the Soviets with around 20,000 pages of secret documents over 6 years. He had leaked strategies, the location of secret military facilities, details on radar defenses, and mobilization plans. Confronted with proof, he admitted to 160 instances of espionage against his nation. American Secretary of Defense Robert S. McNamara addressed concerns that the Swindler leak may have originated with Wennerstrom by revealing, quote, "It is possible that he received certain information regarding designs of U.S. weapons." People around Wennerstrom had failed to notice or suspect that anything was amiss with the Swedish officer. The only suspicious statement acquaintances could recall was when he apparently said, quote, "There will be 1.5 world languages, and English will be the half. The dominating language will be Russian. We might as well face the truth." He made this pronouncement at a dinner party with an air of defeat that made everyone present believe he was not content with his own assessment of global development. He was sentenced to life in prison for his espionage, which then got reduced to 20 years. He only served for 10, as it was customary in Sweden to release prisoners once they served half of their time. Despite the suspicions surrounding Wennerstrom, it's now thought that the AIM-9 Sidewinder was actually stolen by another spy. Manfred Rominger was a German architect and known playboy who worked as an agent for the KGB. It's believed that he managed to smuggle an AIM-9 Sidewinder in a rather simple way, much to the US and NATO's frustration. Polish concentration camp survivor and locksmith Józef Lenowski was living in West Germany in 1951. On a family visit to Poland, the Polish Ministry of Public Security contacted him. He was then recruited by the KGB. Back in Germany, he enlisted Rominger and West German military pilot Wolf-Dieter Knopp. With them, Lenowski formed an espionage team specializing in technology theft. The Polish agent was tasked with retrieving a Litton LM-2 navigation box from the Neuburg Air Base and to steal a McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II aircraft. Fully aware of just how complicated these tasks were, he instead settled for an easier target, the updated Sidewinder missile. The three agents entered Neuburg Air Base on October 22, 1967, using pilot Knopp's security pass. They took advantage of the thick fog that evening to move around with discretion. After locating the missile in an ammunition depot, they placed it inside of a wheelbarrow and drove down the runway. They put the weapon inside of Rominger's sedan, but since it was too big to lay flat inside, Rominger was forced to break the rear window and let it poke out. To avoid any unwanted attention, he wrapped the missile with a carpet and signaled the protrusion with a piece of red fabric as required by law. They drove to Rominger's home in Krefeld, only 200 miles away, and dismantled the weapon. After separating its parts, Rominger boxed the pieces and decided to send them to Moscow by mail. He paid $79.21 in shipping costs, a considerably low price for cutting-edge technology. The package was shipped from Dusseldorf to Copenhagen, and Rominger boarded the plane to make sure the package continued on to Moscow. Despite his precautions, a simple error saw multiple crates return to Dusseldorf. Rominger had to return to Germany and correct the delivery of his package before getting on a plane to the USSR. After the small inconvenience, the missile finally reached its intended destination. In 1968, all three spies were discovered and arrested by the West German police. Lenowski and Rominger both had to serve 4 years in prison, while Knopp was sentenced to 3 years and 3 months. Knopp was released after serving his full sentence, but Rominger was set free in August of 1971 as part of a prisoner swap between the USSR and the West. Thanks to their spies, the Soviets were able to upgrade their missile and release new variants. These saw improved performance and could stand a much better chance against Western weapons. The team at Wimpel began their own work on ambitious updates to the Soviet missile throughout the 1960s. The results were the K-13M with infrared homing and the K-13R with semi-active radar homing. NATO dubbed the two missiles Advanced Atoll and labeled the versions AA-2C and AA-2D respectively. The R-13M was the most similar to the updated AIM-9G Sidewinder. It featured more propellant and therefore more extended range, a new proximity fuse, improved maneuverability, and a sensitive seeker head cooled by nitrogen. Still, neither were all-aspect missiles. The same updates were carried out for the Kaliningrad K-5 air-to-air missiles. The K-13M and its variants were exported to the members of the Warsaw Pact and to other purchasing air forces. Some small nations use these missiles to this day. The People's Republic of China updated its PL-2 with the PL-3 and PL-5 versions. The Soviets provided the missile upgrade technology as a follow-up on the MiG-21 purchase from 1962. Production of the Chinese missile was increased in the 1970s with the construction of 2 missile factories. The Chinese primarily used their missiles to intercept American unmanned aerial vehicles sent from Vietnam and Southeast Asia to mainland China.